Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of Death Space Filling the Void. You know, we're after the holidays here, just January. Days are short. Feeling that seasonal depression, feeling down a bit. COVID numbers are jumping back up. We haven't really dealt with years, or haven't had a chance. The years of COVID we've already dealt with. And just having the numbers go back where they are is just, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. Definitely been a bit of a struggle week, but trying to hang in there and make the best of it. I did perform at Theater 99. I've been performing short form and long form improv comedy. Had a fun show on Friday. One of the drunkest audiences I've seen ever in my career. Just like one guy who was later discovered to have had multiple bottles of Fireball under his chair, was just like nodding off and like unable to follow what was happening and just like blurting things out, making an ass of himself and ruining it for everybody else that was just looking to have fun. I also made rabbit for the first time. Cooking has become something that I've used a lot during the pandemic to be creative and try new things and have a project. It's just how my brain works. It's nice to have a project and something else to focus on. And so I roasted it in white wine, garlic, some mirepoix. I don't know how to say it. I just know how to chop it all up. If you don't know, it's carrots, celery, and onion. Roasted the carrots in that, and then I made a broccoli cheddar soup that I cut the rabbit up into, and although I did try some pieces of it just roasted, delicious, very very good. So yeah, that opens another. I've learned how to cook alligator pretty well down here. Gonna work on rabbit. Gonna make some quail, and I'm also experimenting a lot with vegan. So before you start thinking I'm just some carnivore just trying to eat everything, I'm giving plants a shot too. I've surprised myself. I made some cauliflower steaks, recipe Jamie and I got from watching Queer Eye. Great show. Well, I hope you're hanging in there and doing the best you can, and everyone you know is safe with all these COVID numbers going up. Do have a very interesting interview lined up today. I interviewed Rita Lucarelli, who is an Egyptologist at Berkeley. We talked about ancient Egypt and what we know about ancient Egyptians' view on death. We talked about mummification, of course, and got into why they were mummified. I guess I never really knew why, so it's kind of cool to hear their thought process. And I think the takeaway is that ancient Egyptians don't seem to be... We're more afraid of death now than they were then. We gotta get back there. Well, yeah, you're really going to enjoy the interview. But before we get there, I want to remind you to, if you're liking the show, remember to rate and review it on whichever platform you're listening to it on. And to check the show out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. All right. Thank you so much to Rita. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy. Joining me now on the podcast is Dr. Rita Lucarelli, who's a Egyptologist. Rita, thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
For the viewer or the listeners, they know that we talk about death and grief and psychology, but we haven't talked about anything historical. And so I thought ancient Egypt was such a wonderful place to start. So getting going here, what made you want to become an Egyptologist?
Oh, I guess it's been always my love for the past. And I started to study archaeology, first of the Greek and Roman world, but then I was also interested in the Middle East and the African worlds and languages. So I studied Arabic, and then in my university in Naples, the Orientale University of Naples is its name, there was a course of Egyptology available, and I took the exam, and then I decided that was going to be my specialization. And since then, I didn't stop anymore studying.
All Egypt all the time.
Yes, all Egypt.
Why do you think ancient Egypt has kind of captured the world's imagination? Is it the amount of artifacts that are left behind and preserved so well? What do you think it is?
Yeah, definitely. I think the fascination for ancient Egypt has to do with those incredible monuments, really amazing productions of humankind. Of course, the most famous of all are pyramids, and we still don't know exactly how they were built. So there is the whole mystery around ancient Egypt and its world, and of course, mummification, but also the beauty of art. And so the phenomenon that we call Egyptomania has started very early. I would say the first Egyptomaniacs were the Greeks, the Romans. So as soon as foreigners arrived in Egypt, they were fascinated by those monuments, and they started to try to understand them, if not studying them scientifically. At the beginning, they were still into all what ancient Egyptian produced. And so they told us stories about, and this fascination grew in time.
Hmm. What is it that allows for all of these monuments, you know, the pyramids and everything else that's discovered about ancient Egypt? Is it just the lack of water and humidity? What allows all those monuments and artifacts to remain more so than elsewhere?
Well, those which remain so well preserved are monuments made in hard stone.
Mm.
And what we miss in ancient Egypt are mostly urban structures, cities, villages. We don't have much about houses. We don't know much about daily life of the ancient Egyptians since not much is kept, since they
Mhm.
were houses, for instance, were built in mud bricks, while monuments like pyramids, temples, tombs of the elite, they were built in stone. And this was, of course, not, it did not happen by chance, but because the ancient Egyptians wanted this kind of monuments to stay there forever, to survive themselves as well.
Yeah, just it's like a form of immortality, I guess.
Exactly, yes. They believed in the immortality of the soul, and at the same time, they wanted their monuments to be immortal as well.
Well, they've done certainly a good job. We're sitting here in 2021 and they're still standing. So let's jump into the thoughts in ancient Egypt about around death. What do we know?
Yeah, for the ancient Egyptians, death was actually a new beginning, a new life. Especially, they believed that they will be in the company of the gods. They believed in many gods, and gods were immortal. The gods were there forever. So the main wish of the king, but also of the elite and of all other kind of people, was to survive in eternity with the gods in their own conceived netherworld. So life after death took the form of life on earth, with regions of the netherworld that are well illustrated on papyri or on tomb walls, with a lot of inhabitants of this other world, so gods, demons, and the dead then traveling through those regions and becoming at the end a blessed spirit that for them was a sort of immortal soul.
Oh, wow. So correct me if I'm wrong, the advanced practices of the pyramids and we can go into the traditions of the burial, but is that all a means to help them go on this journey from their earthly lives through to this nether world that you're describing?
Yeah, definitely. In order to survive in the netherworld, first of all, the body is to be intact, and this is why they were using mummification, and we have different type of mummification. Some made for the most wealthy people, and a bit of cheaper mummifications process for people who could not afford the most complex one. And so the body has to be intact, mummified in the tomb. The living have to bring offerings to the tomb, have to remember the name, to perpetuate the memory of the deceased on earth. in order for the spiritual part of the deceased to travel in the netherworld and be assimilated to the gods. So they really believed, for instance, that destroying one's tomb would mean condemn that person to basically not surviving death.
Oh, wow.
The way to survive death was to have the body intact and to let the spiritual part, if we want to call it soul, although their idea was a bit more complex, to make the spiritual part be free to move around, basically.
Oh, wow.
And also to come back to the body. They believed in the Ba. The Ba is a sort of soul, is represented as a bird with human head, with the head of the dead. And the Ba could go out of the tomb, visit Earth, but then he always had to go back to the body. We have a really lot of text and depictions of these beliefs in different parts of the human being after death, and how they interact with each other. So beside the Ba, for instance, there was the Ka, was another spiritual part whose main function was to receiving offerings. So it was a sort of vital force, vital power of the deceased.
Wow. It seems like there's so many different things and rules and like stories. It's fairly complicated.
Complex. It wasn't just a body and soul, but the individual had different parts that would take action, being really performative after death. So it's interesting to look at the text and at the images of their journey in the netherworld.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. Well, before I get to that, I want to ask about the netherworld. Is the netherworld, when I hear netherworld, it maybe it's just modern society, it makes me think of this like negative place, like not like we would think of nowadays, like heaven. Is it more like a hell, and who has access to it? Could it be just the elite, or could the everyday person get there as well?
There was a part of the netherworld that we find depicted again mainly on those magical papyri of the Book of the Dead that were buried with the deceased, or on the tomb walls, where we see a part of the netherworld that looks like what we will call the hell. So a region made of fire, also with the damned that are being men who have been are being punished in the netherworld by the gods and the demons of the netherworld. But on the other hand, other parts of the netherworld resembles instead mounds, rivers, bodies of water, the cultivated land of ancient Egypt. So it was other parts of the netherworld were a sort of mirror of the planet Earth, basically, of the Egyptian landscape mostly. So that's interesting, and I believe everybody had access to the netherworld, but the king and the elite are those who have privileged access, because they can have all this magical equipment that they need in order to recognize the demons and the gods in the netherworld, have the magical spells to recite in front of these demonic guardians in order to pass through gates in the netherworld as a sort of access to a sacred area. What was the temple on earth, we could say, is the same initiation, it's a process of initiation. So you need the special knowledge. And who could get this knowledge, at least from what we found, are the king and the elite. Normal people, let's say, they would not be able to afford these beautifully illustrated papyri or beautifully decorated tombs and coffins. But we think they believed anyway in the netherworld, and they were hoping to access it. And that's why even in the poor burials, for instance, we find objects that were very important for the dead, and that he or she were hoping to bring with them in the netherworld. So they had believes in life after death. When we know it also from a series of texts where it is said indeed that it's important also to live a good life on earth in order to be then also to have access to the netherworld and being judged by Osiris, who is the Lord of the Dead and also the judge of the netherworld, being judged positively during the what they call the final judgment. So this idea of final judgment is something actually similar what we have also in, for instance, monotheistic religions and the fact that you need to live well on earth and because you will be judged by God at the end of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man. So for the average person, a burial, the poorest people in ancient Egypt, would they still be mummified? Is that kind of standard practice, or is that not the case for everybody? You still needed to afford a certain amount?
Yeah, so they were using also sort of natural mummification in many periods of the long Egyptian history, since indeed the dry sand and the dry air of the desert would permit the body to be kept in the sand. They were just burying the body in the shaft tombs in hole, basically in the ground, so that the body would stay intact.
Mm.
So that was a sort of much cheaper mummification. Then we found, of course, mummified bodies that were really clearly made by skilled doctors, skilled mummification priests, and other mummified bodies that you can see were made with less sophisticated, let's say, techniques.
Oh, got it. Makes sense. Yeah, just trying to get people to the netherworld using whatever resources that they had.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the kings and the elite. I mean, how many movies have been made about mummies, and it just the entire world is fascinated by that. So, can you tell us a little bit about a pharaoh or someone at the top of society passes away? What is the traditions around that?
Yeah, so they had to go through a series of ritual. They had, of course, a big following of relatives, servants, in the case of the king, officials, high officials who work for him, and all the priestly circle. They were all working for a successful, let's say, burial of the king or of the elite person. So there were a lot of rituals happening in front of the tomb, like the opening of the mouth ritual, when you empower the body of the deceased or his statue or coffin before burying the body, so that you are sure basically that the body will stay intact and strong, and the person can reactivate his body functions also in the netherworld. So the ritual of the opening of the mouth is very much represented for kings and for private elite individuals. But also the same embalming ritual was taking a long time. They say from 70 days, but also in some cases we heard about ritual for a queen, for instance, taking more than 300 days.
Oh
So
my goodness.
long. It also depended, we think now, from how long the body will need to in order to dehydrate. So it's interesting to see how also they wrote instructions on how to mummify a body very carefully. So there were priests that were specialized in that, and of course also priests that were also doctors and knew very well the human body.
Yeah, it seems like you could make a good living as a mummy doctor or
Yeah, that's a good way to call them.
yeah.
So a lot of rituals, offering rituals, bringing how to bring the offerings, where, what spells to recite when you bring the offerings. Especially the tomb of the king was also a very important cultural place. So where the tomb was very often already at the time of the pyramids placed together with the temple. So there was a temple attached to the pyramid, and the temple or the two temples even in the pyramids were devoted to the rituals, while the pyramid was the tomb itself, right? Because of course, once you close the tomb, all the rituals have to keep happening outside the tomb. They could not, of course, every time open up the tomb to.
Got it. Yeah.
And ideally, these rituals should be performed forever. So they believed in the fact that the priest and the heirs of a family, especially royal families and elite, they will continue to celebrate the deceased king. And kings also had, at a certain point in the second millennium BC, they start to have funerary temples, as we call them. So temples for the cult of the deceased king, together with some gods often associated to these temples.
Oh, wow.
And the cult of the dead was a big thing for the king and the elites.
Sounds like a horror movie could be made about the cult of the dead. It sounds like
creepy, but actually it wasn't, because for them was a feast. So dress with their best clothes and go to the tomb bringing all kind of good things to eat, to drink, incense and clothes. It is represented really as an occasion for celebration.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Mourning. So the mourning, scenes of mourning, we found them only when the funeral procession is represented. Then we see those mourning, generally women, but sometimes also men. The loss of the dead, like it happens today.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this podcast, one of the reasons may be because you're interested in having your death or a loved one's death be celebrated in a different way, to think outside the box a little bit. I personally really like the idea of that. And that's why I'm partnering with a company called Spirit Vessel, who creates these guided, personalized ceremonies for yourself or a loved one. Well, just to give you a little bit of background, Spirit Vessel is a sister-owned company that is bringing sacred ceremonies around death back into the home in a beautiful and meaningful way. I love it. I love the idea of making it more personal. And I've experienced wakes and funerals that it felt so cold, and wish that I could inject a little bit more personality and more storytelling to help the grieving process. Spirit Vessel has these handcrafted ceramic urns and personalized celebration of life ceremony packages that can be done in the comfort of your home or through webcasting services. Whether you're grieving the loss of a loved one, preparing for an imminent death, or taking steps to plan for your own death, Spirit Vessel provides resources to help you respond from your heart with creativity and courage. So basically, you can design your own creative and personalized intimate ceremony that represents the person who you're celebrating. And there's also tips to help people who are grieving going forward. So whether you're interested in the celebration of life ceremony packages, or you'd like to check out or order one of their handcrafted ceramic urns, which are so cool, by the way, check out Spirit Vessel. And if you do order anything, feel free to use the promo code DEATHSPACE for free shipping. If you're like me, it can be really hard to come up with the words to say in a card. I know, I always laugh too, because talk about 10 years of improv training down the drain. Not being able to come up with anything. But that's especially so. I don't know why I can say especially. There you go. Perfect. I can say it. During times of grief, or when someone loses someone. But thankfully, there's the Cardist Studio. There are no words to comfort in a time of deep loss, but you send a card because you care. Yeah, because as we've learned through this podcast, sending something, saying anything, is better than saying nothing. The Cardist Studio creates your message, writes it in your card, and mails it for you. See? They'll help you out. You have the intention, the cardist has the words, bing, bang, boom. All you do is pick the card and tell why you're sending it. No anxiety, all care. For a message from your heart, but not your hands. Just sit back and enjoy your relationships. You know, you don't want to have that awkward feeling like, was that too much? Did I say too much? Am I talking too much? As I'm literally talking too much, as opposed to figuratively talking too much, Pat. All right. My inner voice is kind of mean to me. TheCardistStudio.com, thoughtful, just got easy. And better yet, you can use the promo code DEATHPOD, one word, for 10% off all orders. You ever lie in your resume? Huh? Look at me. Look at me when you're lying. No, you should never do that. That's a terrible idea. But it can be daunting to look at a job listing, see everything that you have and things that you probably don't have. But we can fix that with My Software Tutor. My Software Tutor offers 3 levels of real-time Zoom-based courses with a live instructor. So I'm going to keep you on task. They've seen it, they've heard it, they've seen the resumes, they know the holes, but they're here to help. They'll deliver practical, functional business skills in a friendly and supportive environment. It'd be funny if it really wasn't a supportive environment. Like, when are you going to understand this? Of course, that's not the case. That's just the anxiety or reliving fear dreams we had as children. These courses will increase your marketability. The job market couldn't be better right now. So it's a perfect time to invest in yourself and improve that resume. Whether you're an employee, job seeker, consultant, or contractor. You can sign up for these classes at mysoftwaretutor.com and use the promo code POD20 to save 20% off all registrations. Would you look at that? All right. Enjoy that new job.
Well, I'm getting the sense that generally speaking, ancient Egyptians seemingly weren't terrified of death. They more viewed it as a necessary passing and something, to remember and to celebrate. Do you think that's the case?
Definitely. I mean, they were thinking death like a new life, as I say, a new beginning, and they were preparing for it. So differently from us in our modern society, you tend to exorcise death, you don't want to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
They had no issues to think about death.
That's great. It's funny that something back then, it's something that's lost that I think modern society would benefit from, being able to talk about and think about death.
Yeah, definitely. Even if we found some literary texts that where death is seen as actually a dark word, like in other society. So death is the end of everything, and so you should enjoy life. We found some of those texts, but they seem to be mostly literary texts for entertainment.
Oh.
And it has nothing to do really with what they wanted for their own death.
Oh, okay. When you hear about, I don't know, it's tough to separate what's Hollywood from what's fact. So hopefully you can help me with that a little bit. But these temples and the pyramids, you hear about these curses upon people who open them. Is that, number one, is that real, or is that just like a movie thing? And 2, is that just to protect the bodies, like you said, having to keep them intact so that they're preserved for the netherworld?
So there are real curses in ancient Egypt that were written especially on at the entrance of the tomb, because they didn't want their tomb to be destroyed, so they could write at the entrance of the tomb for the passerby that if you destroy this tomb, you will be destroyed forever as well, something like that. Or if you pass by and you don't leave some offerings, then you will pay for it. So there is a tradition of, let's say, curses, some of which are also very violent, but are not too many compared to other texts like prayers, hymns, or magical spells for the deceased to be able to become a god, for instance. So there are not many, and well, compared to the, let's say, the idea of ancient Egypt that we look at in movies, they didn't really believe that the mummy could wake up, for instance. They didn't believe the dead would come out of the tomb in a scary way. They believed in the communication between the living and the dead. We even have documents that we call letters to the dead or appeals to the dead, where you write to your deceased relative, can be your son, your father, your mother. You ask something, you're expecting an answer from them. So they believed that the dead was around, but not in the scary way that we see in the movies, let's say.
Mm. Well, it's nice. That's a nice thought.
Yeah, so in the mummy in itself will never come back. The mummy stay in the coffin.
Right. It's trying to enjoy trying to become a god in the netherworld. They've got a lot to do. They can't be coming back to haunt people.
And the best to stay intact in the coffin so that the spiritual part can move around.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't believe the mummy will come back.
That's funny.
About the discovery of Tutankhamun, the curse of Tutankhamun, that then gave rise to all these tradition of movies of the mummy.
Okay, so that's where it stems from. Yeah. Do you think Egyptologists, I mean, I'm sure going back 100 years when the tombs were being opened up, do you think Egyptologists ever gave a second thought about going in there because of those curses?
I don't think Egyptologists are easily scared since everywhere. Since Egyptologists, they were entering also tombs that were difficult to enter, rock-cut tombs, subterranean tombs. They were so eager to discover bodies and treasures and texts and understanding what was going on and who was the owner of the tomb, that I don't think they've never been stopped by the fear of a curse. The locals were more scared.
Got it.
More that, well, we should leave the pharaohs in peace, right? But in the end, the local workmen in Egypt are modern Egyptians, so I guess they're not scared anymore neither.
Right. Well, that's good. Yeah, the pursuit of knowledge in such a case is just overwhelming and just so fascinating. Well, how has working as an Egyptologist, if it has, changed your perspective on death or life?
Studying Egyptology made me very much interested in religious beliefs in general. And indeed, in my study of the Egyptian religion, Egyptian view on death, I like to compare with what other societies, ancient and modern, believe about death and the gods and what we call dimension that is not on earth, right? Some natural or anyway, something that you believe even if it's not scientifically proved. The way it shaped my life is that indeed it gave me, I think, a more neutral comparative perspective on idea of death. It made me appreciate really how humankind really can elaborate on, in the end, on hope, thinking that this life on earth is not the end, it's not the only thing that we have, but we have more. And so all religions in the end have some idea about why you should be good in this life. It has to do with something else coming after. Reincarnation can be life with the gods like the ancient Egyptians, can take different forms, but there are so many differences, but also many points of contact among beliefs that I find it really interesting, stimulating to always compare the ancient Egyptian religion with other religions.
Yeah. Well, do you have a religion besides, or a religion that's around today that you have specifically studied and have compared?
Well, I look at other traditional African religions or African rituals, magical traditions, because indeed all this aim of surviving death had to do a lot with the use of what we call magic. So sort of performative power to make things happen, to be protected in life in the netherworld. And this happens in many other societies in Africa. So I like to compare with other African, also modern religions, since anyway, Egypt is indeed in Africa. On the other hand, Egypt is also very much connected to the Middle East, and in particular with the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia. Influencing each other, and it's also interesting how the Egyptian religion accepted foreign gods and foreign traditions. especially from Mesopotamia and what we call the ancient Near East, so the whole area of modern Palestine, Israel, and so on.
Yeah. Well, you have such an interesting job. My goodness, it's so great to talk to you. Is there anything you think I'm missing? Is there anything else you think I should mention about how the ancient Egyptians view death or your life or anything in between?
I don't think so. I think we cover pretty much everything. Maybe just I can still say that it's interesting how ancient Egypt is still, I would say, seen as a living tradition, in the sense that the ancient Egyptian religion and its rituals are still practiced nowadays by many currents of thoughts and religious groups, like Kemetic groups, we call it, that believe still in the power of those rituals, and in many cases believe still in the Egyptian gods. So ancient religion and ancient civilization, but still alive today.
That is interesting. Let's hope those kings' family members are still performing those rituals to keep them going.
I hope so.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been so fun talking to you, and yeah, we'll connect as this comes closer to coming out.
All right, so you will keep me posted.
Yes, we'll do. Have a great day.
You too.
It's crazy what's been lost in some senses, right? Like being less afraid of death. I mean, it's for different reasons. They firmly believe that there was an afterlife and they would continue on. And of course, there are religions still active that think that way. But then there's also atheists and agnostic. And there's just a lot of answers because nobody knows. But yes, that belief did help, seemingly, the ancient Egyptians feel less afraid of death, which is the notion I'm looking to bring back here. Well, thank you so much to Rita for a fantastic insight into ancient Egyptians. Hope you guys like that. I want to remind everyone to check out my other podcast called That Gives Me Anxiety. It's going to be going weekly, coming up here soon. Very exciting. And once again, I'd like to mention and thank the sponsors. Spirit Vessel, use the promo code DEATHSPACE, one word, for free shipping on personalized urns and the Celebration of Life ceremony packages. The Carta Studio, you can use the promo code DEATHPOD, one word, for 10% off all orders. And My Software Tutor, you can use the promo code POD20 for 20% off all orders. Thanks again to all those companies. As always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.